Hi, everybody. We are going to go back into history a little bit more chronologically. So we've seen what's happened in the 1950s, post-World War II. We took a look at the civil rights movement, which spans over the 50s, 60s, and 70s, and some of you researched different topics in different decades. But now we're going to see what's going on while the civil rights movement is happening, and we're going to kind of blend that content in as we go. Now, before we really get into the 1960s, we got to remember what had just happened in history in the years before. So, we're first going to start with a look of one of the biggest key terms that we have this entire semester, and that is the Cold War. So, what was it? The Cold War is a war of influence all over the world after World War II between the USA and the Soviet Union. We are trying to get our system of government set up around the world, as are they. It is going to be democracy versus communism. And we are going to see this fight take us to many different places and all the way up until the 1950s, the early 1950s. They are going to have a leader by the name of Joseph Stalin. And Joseph Stalin is going to pass away during the Eisenhower administration, and a new leader is going to take over. And that man's name is going to be Nikita Khrushchev. Now, we've tried to handle communism in the past with the policy of containment, which is just keeping it where it is, contain. We see that word contain inside containment right here. And so that was our original plan and our hope for handling communism. And we're going to see how well that works for us moving forward. We're going to start off with reviewing what we've done with the Cold War so far this year, and we're going to start with Mr. Harry Truman. Now, Truman is the president at the end of World War II. He comes in office after FDR dies, and after World War II ends, the Cold War really begins. Now, his policy that he is going to be known for is the policy of containment, and containment is trying to keep communism where it is. It's not the outright trying to invade and destroy these countries, but keep it where it is. Make it lose its appeal. Let it die out on its own. And Truman's going to try to do this a couple different ways. He's going to issue the Truman Doctrine, which is a public declaration saying that we will go help any country that is threatened by communism and trying to resist. We'll create military organizations like NATO, or probably one of the most effective ones is known as the Marshall Plan. The Marshall Plan is when the United States starts funding countries, mostly in Western Europe, with loans and money to try to detour communism from actually taking root. He sees a couple different issues. We see the first one with the Berlin airlift, and the first issue is Stalin cuts off access out of West Berlin all the way around to try to prevent people from flooding in to West Berlin from the surrounding communist areas. Remember, Germany is split in half. The west side is democratic, the east side is communist. And inside the communist side, or the communist country of East Germany, is the capital city of Berlin that is also split. So the democratic side, West Berlin, is completely engulfed by communist land, and it's going to be completely blocked off. So what is the United States going to do? Are we going to roll in tanks? Are we going to start dropping bombs? Are we going to threaten them with a nuke? No, we start dropping humanitarian aid. We handle it peacefully, and so the Cold War stays cold. But in Europe, we are successful as compared to when we look what's happening in Asia. We don't have the same level of success. The second largest country in Asia, China, goes communist. Their leader, Mao, takes over, and Americans are really fearful of the domino theory, that if one country or one domino falls, it's going to knock over the next one, and the next one, and the next one, and soon the whole world is going to fall to communism. And that takes us to our first major war inside the Cold War. We see the Korean War, and the Korean War is going to span two presidencies. It's going to start in the Truman administration, and it's not going to end until the next president, Eisenhower or Ike, takes over and helps fight back against the communists. Now, it's going to go back and forth, and we looked at what happens, but ultimately, at the end of the day, Korea is going to stay divided, and it is still divided to this day. The northern being a totalitarian dictatorship, a communist country, the southern half of the Korean peninsula, South Korea, remains a democratic country still today. Now, Ike is going to handle things a little bit differently. He's going to bring in this idea of brinkmanship, that he's willing to go to the brink of war. He's going to talk a big talk. He's going to threaten to drop nukes. And it works when people back off. He's banking on everyone else realizing or just accepting the fact that if they attack us, then everyone else has missiles pointed at them. So we're hoping that this sort of threat will even things out and hopefully get them to back off from making any brash decisions. And it works early on. So these big threats are going to work, but Eisenhower is not really going to be keen on pushing towards actual violence. Now, inside the United States, we have issues with McCarthyism, meaning we are going to have this fear that communism is spreading all around our country. We're going to fear not only communism abroad, but communism in our own country. And we finally see a major moment in the Cold War conversation. Their leader since the 1920s, Joseph Stalin, is going to die. And so the new leader of the Soviet Union is going to be a man. You're going to want to write this name down. Nikita Khrushchev. There's a lot of H's in that last name. Nikita Khrushchev. And he is going to be the brand new leader of the Soviet Union who we are going to be dealing with today. Let's take a look at this new decade. We are going to go into the 1960s, and it all starts with an election, because at the end of the 1950s, Eisenhower's terms are up, and in 1960, we have ourselves an election. There's going to be a new president, and it's going to be a huge competition between a man named Richard Nixon, who was Eisenhower's vice president. He was involved in the House of Un-American Activities, that McCarthyism, hunting for communists, and he's very, very well known, and a brand new young upstart by the name of John F. Kennedy. And they are going to compete in this election and be part of the first televised TV debates in U.S. history. Nixon is really better known. However, these TV debates are really going to swing a lot of voters towards Kennedy, and John F. Kennedy is going to win this election. This is a super important swing in the political spectrum. The Republicans were very, very successful, so it seemed like the Republicans could keep control of the White House for quite some time. However, during this debate, there are two prevailing pieces of technology that people could use to interact with this debate. If those people watched it on the television, most people said that John F. Kennedy won. He looked healthy, he looked young, he looked energetic, attractive young man. Meanwhile, if people listened to it on the radio, they felt that Richard Nixon had won. So there is definitely this huge play of appearance, and it may be shallow for sure, but it definitely played a huge role in deciding who actually won this election, and JFK is going to win. JFK is going to win, and you can see it represented by these blue states. Now, it may look a little interesting where it looks like there's a lot of red states out west, and there are a large amount. However, Kennedy wins a lot of big states at this time. California is not the biggest state in terms of electoral college votes. It's definitely New York, and he's going to heavy-handedly win that. He's going to win Massachusetts, some key states in the Deep South, and even Texas. And so he's going to win a lot of these bigger cities, although he's not going to win out west. He's still going to win the presidency. So we stepped foot into the Kennedy administration, and a lot of people have a very fond memory of John F. Kennedy, but he's got a little bit of disputed memory, and we'll see kind of how much of a positive legacy does he actually deserve. And so we'll take a look into what Kennedy calls his new frontier. Now, JFK was the youngest president ever elected until Barack Obama in 2008. And so a lot of people looked at him as this young hero that's going to lead America through all their problems, like Camelot. And during his time period, people are going to be obsessed with his young family and his beautiful children and his brothers, and they become kind of national names. The Kennedy family does. It seemed like it was this new face of youth and energy in politics that got people really, really excited. The election of 1960 has had the highest voter turnout in any election in the past 60 years. And what JFK is going to try to do is he's going to promise what he calls a new frontier. We're going to go where people have never gone before. We are going to make massive leaps in terms of domestic reforms, in the civil rights movement, and kind of massive leaps in foreign policy. We are not just going to take control of the Cold War, we're going to win it, we're going to end it, and we're going to defeat the Soviet Union. So Kennedy's going to make some big, big claims. Now, when we look at Kennedy, Kennedy has a lot of big goals and aspirations. This whole Cold War debate wanted supremacy everywhere. We wanted to win everywhere, including someplace that people had never been before in the 1960s, the space. And so in space, we want to go and take control of the moon. People don't know what it could be used for. Maybe we could set up missile bases. Maybe we could set up satellites and control it like we would any other piece of land. So people don't really know the capabilities yet of exactly what it could be used for. He is going to make a lot of promises about these bold changes about what America can and should be capable of. That we are going to get the first man in the moon. We are going to get a man on the moon by the end of the decade. By 1970, the United States will have a man on the moon, which, although he is not around when this happens, his promise actually comes true. In 1969, Americans land on the moon. One small step for man, one giant leap for mankind. Now, these ideas are really going to be what Kennedy is about. He is going to make some big claims. He's going to have some really big ideas, and we're going to see how well he's actually able to accomplish these goals. So he's got a lot of fervor around him, and he's got this buildup of energy, but we'll see how successful he is in taking care of those things in the Cold War. Is he going to be able to end it? If so, how? So, the biggest issue, although we see Kennedy trying to deal with the civil rights movement, Kennedy isn't really going to get a lot done. And there's going to be one major reason why, and we'll talk about that in our next video. But for now, we're going to focus on foreign policy more than anything else. Kennedy deals with communism in a very upfront way. And it's really kind of telling in his inaugural address, the first speech before he is sworn in to be president of the United States. Let every nation know, whether it wishes us well or ill, that we shall pay any price, bear any burden, meet any hardship, support any friend, oppose any foe to ensure the survival and success of liberty. We will do this and more. That we will win the Cold War. We're not just going to take the lead, we are going to end this. Point blank, period. It's going to be over. And the biggest thing that Kennedy is going to do to try to achieve this is he's going to try to close what is known as the missile gap and increase America's defenses. The belief at the time was that the Soviet Union had overtaken the United States in the later part of the 1950s when they were the first nation to successfully get a satellite into space. You may remember the name Sputnik. And when that satellite is launched into space, it creates a fear amongst many Americans that the United States is losing the Cold War. And all of the information that Kennedy is being given, it's going to be incorrect in the numbers, but that is going to lead him to believe that the United States is falling behind and we need to ramp up the amount of missiles we're producing, the type of weapons we're using, and how to overtake the Soviet Union. And it's going to take us into 3 different countries. It's going to take us into Germany, Berlin. It's going to take us onto the island of Cuba, just south of Florida. And eventually, it's going to start to pull us into Vietnam, which we're going to talk about in a slightly later video. The first issue where we're really going to see the Soviet Union and the USA really go toe-to-toe under the JFK administration is going to be in Berlin. And in Berlin, what's going to happen, remember, it's split up in half and completely surrounded by East Germany. So Khrushchev, the leader of the Soviet Union, is going to be really, really upset with the massive amount of skilled workers and laborers leaving East Germany and flooding into West Berlin. West Berlin is going to be much more prosperous than East Berlin or East Germany as a whole. We're funneling a lot of money in there. We're really trying to keep that support alive, and a lot of people are coming in to West Berlin. And Khrushchev is really, really upset that he's losing a full grip on his citizens in this area, that people are leaving his country and moving into this area, or at least working in that other area, because we're going to start reaping a lot of those benefits. So in an attempt to stop the United States from getting a large amount of control and traction in this area, the Soviet Union is going to threaten to remove all forms of influence from West Berlin, and it's not going to successfully be able to do that. You can't stop all pieces of information from coming in. And instead, by 1961, it's going to begin constructing something known as the Berlin Wall. The Berlin Wall is going to be a literal wall, not the Iron Curtain, which is a metaphorical wall, but a literal wall that separates East Germany and East Berlin from West Berlin. So West Berlin is completely surrounded now by a giant wall blocking it off. People cannot get in to West Berlin. It's going to create a lot of issues in terms of people that are split across this wall. You may have family that lives on one side of the city, and so you will be completely separated from them. You can't get through. There are guards manning this area. It becomes very, very difficult. And from the United States point of view, we become looked at as very weak. JFK can't get this job done in less than a year of being in office. They've already started putting up this massive wall. He's losing control of this area, and it looks like the Soviet Union is really sort of taking back control over this area. You can check out a lot of different videos about what happens. This is one particular YouTube video that you can take a look at, but this wall is going to stand for almost 3 decades straight. They're going to build it brick by brick, and it will be a literal wall that separates these two sides of the city. Now, it is a physical manifestation, a physical representation of this divide in the world, and it's kind of dead center in Europe. There is going to be first just barbed wire, and then it's going to be a bricked wall. It's going to be a giant concrete structure that completely divides. You can't even see over it. It's not something you can climb. If you were caught climbing, you could be shot, right? You could be arrested. There's a lot of terrible things that could happen to you. If you tried to break across that border, it would be impossible to get across. They're going to see this go up kind of one by one, but eventually this entire city will be completely divided. And like I said, you may have family members that you may not see for decades because they live on the other side of the wall. Now, the Berlin Wall is going to begin being built in the Kennedy administration in 1961, and it is going to stay up for a very long time. Now, it doesn't exist today in its entirety. It was torn down. However, right, this wall is going to last for the next 28 years. West Berlin is going to be blockaded, isolated, separated from the rest of the world. It's going to be cut off. There's no way to get in except via airlift. And really, this Berlin Wall becomes a physical symbol of this separation, of this tension between us and the Soviet Union. Now, this is what I was talking about when I said that West Berlin was completely blocked off. So the Berlin Wall was built, and you say, how can you box somebody in like that? This whole area all around is East Germany, completely owned by the Soviet Union. Inside of East Germany was West Berlin. West Berlin, on all of its side, is kind of touching East Germany, or then East Berlin here. And so what the Soviets did is on their side of the border, they built a wall, very close to the border, but on their side of the border, they built a wall all the way around their territory where West Berlin was, completely suffocating it, cutting it off really from the rest of the world. And so JFK is not going to have a hot start. This happens less than a year into his presidency. These photos you can see here of this divide. It begins slowly as just a barbed wire fence, and then eventually this wall is going to be built higher and higher all the way through. And at one point, right, JFK is going to visit this wall, and he's going to give a huge speech in 1963, 2 years after this wall has been built, talking about solidarity. Ich bin ein Berliner, which translates to I am a Berliner. I am from Berlin. I am with you. We are standing in solidarity, but still, he is not able to solve this issue. The next place JFK is really going to run into issues is in Cuba. And Cuba is very, very close to the United States, just off the coast of Florida. And what happens, a dictator by the name of Fidel Castro, which is a very important name you're going to want to write down, takes control of Cuba in 1959, and he's going to start developing a lot close of ties with the Soviet Union. JFK is going to blame Republicans under the Eisenhower administration for allowing this communist satellite to arise on our very doorstep, about not doing anything sooner, and because they didn't make any decisive blows, they let the Soviet Union stay around. They didn't end the Cold War when they could have, and they should have made some more decisive moves. So what happens is, this is towards the end of the Eisenhower administration, and they had been planning this mission to send in Cuban exiles back into Cuba to invade and overthrow Castro, to take him out, to assassinate him. And so this plan is sort of laying around. It wasn't actually developed fast enough to actually be able to carry out safely. Although they were training these people, they wanted to make sure it was effective. And so Eisenhower is out of office, in comes Kennedy, and Kennedy gets all this information, these pieces, and he decides to move forward with this plan. And this plan is going to be called the Bay of Pigs invasion, because there is a bay, which is a piece of land right off the water, sort of enclosed by land on either sides, and it's called the Bay of Pigs, and that is where we're going to invade. It's not a very creative name. It sounds like there's a lot more going on there, but there's just hogs in the area, so it becomes known as the Bay of Pigs. And so as we invade the Bay of Pigs, it's going to kind of unleash a series of events that are going to lead to almost nuclear annihilation of the United States. What happens is the United States tries to invade and take out Fidel Castro. You can see in this photo here. Castro is going to become close friends and allies with Khrushchev. You see him here on the right, the leader of the Soviet Union. And the United States is going to try to invade the Bay of Pigs. You see this area circled right here. The Bay of Pigs is going to be our launching point, and they're going to get on land, and after they get a strong foothold, they're going to move towards Havana. But this plan required an airstrike from the federal government on this land to help them out, and Kennedy refuses to use the U.S. Army. He wants it to be done in secret. He doesn't want to use the armed forces. He wants the CIA to carry it out separately, and without that air support, they completely fail. They're captured, they're held prisoner, and all this is going to do is make Fidel Castro even more angry. These people tried to take me over, they tried to take me out, they tried to kill me. And so Castro is going to start to want revenge. This is only going to push the Cubans and the Soviets closer and closer together. And it's going to lead to one of the biggest moments, the height of the Cold War, where we become so close to nuclear annihilation. This is going to be, when you think about it, failure number 2, and this all comes within about 2 years of each other. We have in 1961 the building of the Berlin Wall, and then the next big moment we have here is the Bay of Pigs invasion. That's a complete failure. And so this is not the memory that most people have of JFK. It's much more positive and progressive, but a lot of the earlier years that JFK is around are complete failures and flops. Now, Kennedy is going to take full responsibility for this, but he doesn't apologize, and all this is going to do is piss Castro off more. And so now this man, who is right on our back doorstep, right off the coast of Florida, is already close ties with our number one enemy, is going to get even closer, and things are going to heighten very, very quickly. So as this tension starts to build, we start keeping a closer eye on our neighbor to the south. And because Cuba starts getting kind of nuzzling up a little bit closer with our enemy, the Soviet Union is going to start to build up nuclear missiles in Cuba to prevent the United States from invading, to sort of kind of hold up a brand new weapon to slow us down. And what's going to happen is, we're not aware that all of these pieces are being built there, and they're going to kind of be smuggled in until October 14th, 1962. An American spy plane is going to be taking pictures of the island of Cuba and eventually is going to discover that missile camps are being built. 24 of them are considered medium range, 18 of them are considered short range ICBMs, intercontinental ballistic missiles, meaning they can shoot between land gaps very, very far. Now, the scariest thing about these 42 missiles is that they are nuclear warheads. There are nuclear missiles pointed at the United States 50 miles off the coast of Florida. So what's the US going to do? Right? How should we respond? How can we respond? What are we going to do in order to prevent them from launching those missiles? Because once they go up in the air, it's game over. Should we bring an airstrike? Should we try for diplomacy? Maybe we will remove some of our nukes in Europe or Asia if they remove their nukes in Cuba. Should we try to full scale just invade them? Should we put a naval blockade to try to keep these things out? What are we going to do that is going to stop this issue but also not agitate them enough that they're going to fire these missiles? And what JFK decides to do is quarantine Cuba. Now, we know what the word quarantine means all too well here with the COVID-19 virus, the coronavirus being more prevalent when this video is being made. And we know what that word quarantine means. If you're quarantined, you're isolated, maybe you're isolated in your room from everywhere else because you are sick or you had contact with somebody who was sick so that you don't spread it to anywhere else. You are isolated. So we are going to try to isolate, quarantine Cuba to keep any new missiles out. And we're going to make a big threat to the Soviet Union that we will invade and take over Cuba if they do not remove its nukes. So we try to keep them where it is, but then we also try to do a little bit of a threat, and we're trying to figure out how the Soviet Union is going to respond. What should we do? Now, the problem with this is there's a bunch of different people involved. There's a lot of moving pieces. Of course, there's the USA and there's the Soviet Union. There's Kennedy and Khrushchev, but there's also a really important man in the middle. Even if Khrushchev and the Soviet and the USA are trying to sort things out, what if Castro decides to fire these missiles? What's going to happen? So we need to understand who these leaders are and how they're going to respond. What I encourage you all to do now is to check out this video series, the Armageddon Letters. This will give us a look into what each of these three leaders are thinking. There are 3 videos you're going to want to take a look at if you type in or go to that link up above. You're going to find a playlist that one says B Castro, one says B Kennedy, and one says B Khrushchev. You're going to get the point of view of each of these 3 individuals leading up to and during this event. So you're going to really have to see how these different personalities of these individuals are going to play into how this whole thing plays out. Now, with the Cuban Missile Crisis, it's going to take the span of 13 days before this is actually resolved. This is the actual photo that the U-2 plane is going to capture as it flies over. We see tents being built. We see launch positions. We see fuel tankers. Everything is there ready to attack. This isn't like months from now or weeks from now. It's going to be ready. It's ready now to attack if they want to. So that puts imminent danger and threat. And when we look at where they're being stationed, we find out that they're all over the island. It's not even an isolated area. And we see, well, how far can they actually hit? Most of the United States and North America and all of Central America and the large portion of South America are all at risk. So this is imminent danger. Almost all of the United States, over 95% of the United States, is within easy range. All major cities are within easy range. So the United States is in clear and present danger. Now, after this blockade, this quarantine, we try to really be tough and enforce it that if they cross this line, we're going to fire on them. But if we fire on the Soviet Union, that means war is going to break out. And how this whole scenario is going to play out is the Soviet Union is going to bring up ships, and it looks like we're getting closer and closer and closer to war. But as it gets closer, the Soviet Union is going to approach this final line and within the last minute get word from Moscow, from Khrushchev, to stop and turn around, and war is going to be avoided. But we come less than a few hundred feet from all-out nuclear warfare. In the end, the Soviet Union and the USA are able to come to an agreement. And at the last minute, both Khrushchev and Kennedy realized about what was really at stake. They're going to come to an agreement where the Soviet Union is going to remove all of its missiles from Cuba, as the United States will also remove all of its missiles at Turkey that were pointed at their capital city, and vow to never invade Cuba again. Now, the impact of this is going to be large. Number one, this is going to be seen as a huge political victory for JFK. This is going to be a monumental moment, but unfortunately, just months in the future, Kennedy is going to be assassinated. And so the last thing that people really remember that Kennedy did was this huge event where he saved us from the brink of war. A hotline is going to be installed. One red phone in Moscow, one red phone in Washington, D.C. for the leader of both countries, a direct line of communication so that they can avoid a crisis like this in the future. And lastly, probably the most important point is that this almost nuclear war really showed both sides that we need to move away from confrontation and move towards negotiation. A lot of you are starting to drive now, or maybe you've been in the car where an individual is driving and they cut lanes too quickly, they're going too fast, or maybe you're driving in the winter and you hit a patch of ice and you come so close to having an accident. You become, right, within inches of wrecking your entire car or possibly worse, getting injured or losing your life. And you have a panic attack for a short moment and think, oh my God, what just happened? But you come so close to the brink of something terrible happening that you realize you need to slow down. You need to take a deep breath. You need to start making a better choice. And I really love the way that Kennedy kind of sums this up. Our most basic common link is the fact that we are all inhabit this planet. We all breathe the same air. We all cherish our children's future. We are all mortal. Realizing that this could have been the end of the world as we know it. So this is where we're going to stop. We'll review this a little more in the future. If you haven't yet, stop and take a look at the Armageddon Letter videos, and we'll talk about this more in our next video. If you have any questions, feel free to drop a comment down in the section below, and I will get back to you. Peace.